Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Michael White. I'm the audiovisual librarian here at the Glenview Public Library. And on behalf of our partner libraries at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library, the Northbrook Public Library, the Addison Public Library, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program, 33 and a Third, Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace. Tonight is the first night in a series of programs that will run once a month for the next year. 12 months, each month a new author talking about their 33 and a Third book and its classic essential album. 33 and a Third is a series of short books about popular music, each focusing on an iconic individual album that occupies a specific place in music history. Over the next 12 months, you'll have a chance to meet the authors who took on these seminal records and bring your questions. So we're really glad that you're here tonight. And we do hope that you'll consider joining us for future 33 and a Third events, all taking place on Zoom. We're taking advantage of the virtual space that's been created by the pandemic to reach out to a wide range of authors over different geographic places and a wide range of musical styles. So on to tonight's program. Aaron Cohen is the author of Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace, which is part of the 33 and a Third series of books. Most recently, he's the author of Move On Up, Chicago Soul Music and Black Cultural Power, which looks at the artistic, social, and cultural and political changes that shaped soul music in Chicago during the 1960s and 1970s. Currently, he teaches humanities and English composition at City Colleges of Chicago, and he's a regular writer for publications, such publications as the Chicago Reader and Downbeat. So please join me. We're really thrilled to have him here tonight. Please join me in us in welcoming Aaron.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Glenview Public Library. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Is my sound okay? Okay, good. I want to thank the Glenview Public Library for having me. I want to thank Michael. I want to thank Jody. I want to thank Neil, Jennifer, and all of my longtime library friends, and as well as my newer library friends. So, and I of course want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I haven't looked and seen the participant list, so I can't thank you all individually, but thank you collectively. So I'm here to talk about my book about the Amazing Grace album. And what I'm also going to do tonight is talk about three things. Number one, of course, why I wrote the book. That's the most important question, as to why such a endeavor takes place. I want to talk about the album. I want to talk about what about this album that I've had for, as you can see, a very long time, what made me want to write about it. And I also want to talk about how I went about it, the whole process of writing this book for those who are curious about what goes into writing a book. And I also want to talk about, well, this book came out about 10 years ago. It came out in the fall of 2011. And in the last 10 years, a lot has changed. A lot has changed in terms of how we as a planet appreciate Aretha Franklin's work. A lot has changed in terms of how we appreciate and understand this album, but a lot of things still need to be said about the album. A lot of things still need to be said about this part of this time and place. And so I'm happy to talk about that. And I will also, for the very first time, now this is the very first time this has ever happened, I'm going to play you some audio from some of the interviews that I conducted while I was working on the book. I was very fortunate to speak with some wonderful musicians, and which I'll play you a little bit of that. And I can also, maybe if we have time, talk about Aretha and my contacts with Aretha. This is a picture, I don't know if you can see it here. I'm holding it up to the camera. This is myself with Miss Franklin. That was taken exactly 20 years ago. It was taken in the summer of 2001. And if we get to that, I'll talk about that little episode in my life. And if we have time. If not, we can hang out afterwards. But anyway, let me start from the beginning. And the beginning was, gosh, many years even before this picture was taken. And I was growing up not too far from here. I live in Chicago, and I was growing up in Evanston, Illinois, and I was loving Aretha Franklin. I knew Aretha Franklin's music from the radio, from top hits, from the albums that I had, and happened to just pick up Amazing Grace, and it blew me away. Blew me away for several reasons. One of them being her voice. One of them being these songs, another one being these traditions, because this was a musical tradition. The soul gospel tradition was one that at the age I bought the album, I could sense there was something that connected to the soul music, to the rock and roll, to the blues that I loved. But, as a teenager picking up the album, I couldn't put my finger on it. And years go by. And along with continuing to listen to Aretha Franklin's music, I started to delve deeper into the gospel tradition. And I'm very fortunate to live in Chicago, and very fortunate to live in a city where the gospel tradition is so rich here, that Chicago being the birthplace of gospel music. And some of the songs that Aretha Franklin performed on what became Amazing Grace were songs that have a Chicago origin. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Also, the way Aretha Franklin could just sing for as long as she wanted, as wonderful as these singles are, Respect and Think and Chain of Fools, she wasn't limited to 2 minutes or 3 minutes. If she wanted to sing for 10 minutes, she could sing for 10 minutes. If she wanted to just freely improvise, she could do that. If she wanted to sing in different keys or extend the time signatures, she could. And she did not have that freedom on any other album. So, I'm getting more and more deeper and fascinated by this record, and which came out, by the way, in 1972. So around the late 90s or mid 1990s, and picked up this box set. For those of you who are like me, old enough to remember when box sets were the way it was. And this is a really good, very, very good 4 CD collection of Aretha Franklin's recordings on the Atlantic label, which were her commercial peak. And a lot of people felt her cultural peak as well. But I thought it was odd that in these 4 CDs of her Atlantic recordings, there's only one song from that Amazing Grace album. And I thought that was strange. And, because this was also, as I found out, was her best-selling album that, I started digging, doing my research, and I thought, well, this album, Amazing Grace, sold 2 million copies. None of her albums sold that much, which is interesting. And then other things like Rolling Stone magazine presented Aretha Franklin as the best singer of the rock and roll era, put her on the cover, accompanying article by Mary J. Blige. And I thought, great, fantastic. Aretha Franklin certainly is deserving that honor. But this Amazing Grace album was not mentioned once in that article. Again, biggest selling album where her voice is at her peak. She's going through some interesting personal stuff at that time. Why is this album being so neglected? Again, this was about maybe 2005, 2006, 2007. So put yourself in that time period. So I thought, well, I want to champion this album, because there was a book on her first album, I Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You, which, was the one that sent her on her course on Atlantic, but there was nothing about this Amazing Grace album. Wanted to know why that was. It seemed like that was connected to this way that even though gospel music is not just so essential for a singer like Aretha Franklin, but gospel music is so essential for American popular music. Why is it being so neglected? And so I wanted to go after these questions. I wanted to answer these questions. I wanted to answer them in a book. I wanted to, explore the Amazing Grace album from these questions, from this point of view, looking at Aretha Franklin's work from a gospel perspective. And at the same time, not just loving Aretha Franklin's music, but loving so much music from that era of the early 1970s when jazz and gospel and soul and rock and folk music could have gone in all of these different directions. It seemed like there was this sort of, I don't want to say zeitgeist, but kind of like these different sorts of buzzes going on. And the Amazing Grace album fit into that time period so beautifully. And again, back at that time, 2007, 2008, that time period was not as explored or celebrated as much as I thought it should be. Things are different now. This is the 50th anniversary of the year 1971, the year before the album came out. And there's now a new documentary that's coming out about music in the year 1971. And there's other films and other books, other documents about this late 70s period. So people are looking at it differently now. But back when I wrote the Amazing Grace book, it was still not as discussed. So I thought, well, okay, it's up to me to explore. Now, there's another reason why I felt the need to write about Amazing Grace when I did, 2007, 2008, was most of my background as a journalist. Most of my background was as a, most of my background was as, there's a little poll there, I didn't want to see it. Most of my background as a journalist. Most of the work I do in terms of writing about music involves trying to interview as many people as possible and combine their stories with my story, with my perspective. And we were losing a lot of people who were part of this album. Arif Mardin, who's arranging and composing, played a part on the record. Jerry Wexler, who was the producer of Atlantic Records, had passed. So I really felt the need to really just jump in and get this book together before we lost more people. So again, this is 2008, and I wrote a proposal and submitted it, and with all these points that were raised. And before I continue, does anybody have any questions so far?
I'm not seeing any
Okay.
questions in the chat just yet, but
Okay.
let's keep going a little bit more,
Okay,
Aaron, and
great,
we'll
great.
keep an eye on that for sure.
Okay, great. Just didn't want to disregard anybody who had anything to ask.
Absolutely.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I set out to do was answer these questions about gospel music, about why gospel music had been, while such an important part of American music and such a part of Aretha Franklin's music and her life, why it was so neglected. I also wanted to talk about where Aretha Franklin was at this point in her life. She was about to turn 30, which again is a milestone for a lot of people. She was the most popular, one of the most popular women singers on the planet, certainly the most popular female soul singer on the planet at that time. What made her want to go to church? What made her want to go back to her origins in the church? She also, as I played in the beginning, she sang a couple contemporary songs. I played her version of Marvin Gaye's Holy Holy. This is the 50th anniversary of his What's Going On album. She sang Carole King's You've Got a Friend, but much of her songs on this album were looking back to an earlier period of gospel music, the early 1950s. Now, at that time, soul singers in America, by and large, did not look backwards. They did not look towards a generation music from a generation earlier. What made Aretha Franklin want to do that? So that was a question I wanted to ask. I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out what that was all about. And then something else too, and that is, and this is something that I always want to stress in terms of writing about music, is that it's not just about the individual. It's not just about the star, even though those are the ones whose names are above the title. Those are the ones who are the marquee names. But it's also the music of groups. One of the things that really fascinated me about the Amazing Grace album is that This is a great group. This was her best band. It had the guitarist Cornell Dupree, the bassist Chuck Rainey, drummer Bernard Pretty Purdie. It had the album also featured James Cleveland, a very important person in gospel, who I'll talk about in a bit, and Alexander Hamilton, who led the choir. So, and there was also a conga player, Pancho Morales. And so I wanted to get into this band, how this band worked together, what made this sound of this group stand out, what made this collective energy stand out. So, I wanted to go into all these questions and interview as many people as I could. But then a couple things happened. Number one, I was put in touch with producer Alan Elliott. I don't know if he's here tonight, but he might be. And Alan Elliott was in the midst of working on the film Amazing Grace, which, if you have the original album, you'll see that in 1972, it was written that this is going to be a movie coming out. And at that time, 2008, the movie was still being worked on by Alan Elliott. So I was very fortunate in that I was able to see hours of raw footage of this film that had not yet been released. And I was also able to talk to Alan about what he planned to do with the film. And I'm going to talk about that toward the end. I was also able to get in touch with almost everybody who at that point was still alive who had worked on the album. I was able to get in touch with just about everybody in Aretha Franklin's group, the musicians I mentioned. I went out to Los Angeles to go to the church where it was recorded and speak to the people who were there at the time. I was able to speak to Alexander Hamilton, who led the choir, and their stories were very compelling. And as much as the book was about Aretha Franklin and about what she was going through, I wanted to include the stories of these incredible musicians that she was with. And so that's what I did. And I wanted to also combine it with research into that time period. Now, this was the post-civil rights era. This was the time when a few years after Dr. Martin Luther King was killed, and there was a movement about where do we go from here? Where do we, the African-American people, go to? And there was at the time, too, a belief that the most pure form of Black musical culture came from gospel music. That was the most pure and unadulterated. And Aretha Franklin herself was very much into that spirit of Afrocentricity. If you remember the cover of the album, and she's in Barbados, and she is wearing outfit that, really she asserted who she was as in terms of visual presentation as well as her musical presentation on this album. So I wanted to look up what that was all about. And I was even able to speak at length with a friend of hers from that time period who she shared a lot of ideas with, a poet by the name of Nikki Giovanni, who in addition to being a great poet, was also the most hilarious person I've ever spoken to in my entire life. But anyway, so there's where I was going with this. I was looking into the music. I was looking into this history. I was looking into what was going on in the culture at that time. And so I was combining interviews with research. I saw there was a few questions. Anybody, was there a question from the...
Yeah, I've got a couple for
Okay.
you, Aaron. So one question was the concert the same as the film that was released, the documentary film a couple of years ago in theaters?
Yes. Now, well, that's the short answer. The short answer is yes. The film that was released in theaters in 2008, late 2018, early 2019, that was the film of the recording of Amazing Grace. Longer answer is that when the film became this album, it was edited and there was a lot of post-production work that went into it. But when you saw the film, you saw the performance that was the raw material for the Amazing Grace album. And I saw the raw footage of that film that was released.
Got it. Thank you. The other question I had was you were talking a lot about the interviews that you conducted for the book. Did you interview Aretha's sisters? Somebody asked.
I met her sister Irma Franklin. Her sister Carolyn died, many years earlier. But I did not interview Irma for the book. And I wanted to concentrate on people who were involved in the production of the album. And while Irma was, around at the time, Irma was not directly involved with the album itself. But Irma's a wonderful singer too, as was Carolyn Franklin as well. I definitely recommend buying albums by all of the Franklin sisters, Aretha as well as Carolyn and Irma.
Great. Couple more questions coming through. I love this question. What record store did you buy that album from when
Yes,
you were a
I bought
teenager?
it at Secondhand Tunes, which is no longer there, but Secondhand Tunes, which is on Dempster Street in Evanston. When I was a teenager, Dempster Street was the stretch of Evanston for which to buy used records. That was a place I went to when I should have probably been in school, but you didn't hear that from me.
And Valerie asks, how did the 33 and a third come about? How did you hear about 33 and a third, and were you invited to write it, or did you submit your proposal to become part of the series?
Yes, well, 33 and a third had been around for a few years before I submitted. I can't remember what year the series started, but it was around for a few years. And as someone who loves music, you can probably see from my books and records, and loves writing, I knew about the series. And then and now, which is a really great thing, is the 33 and a third series is open for submissions. There's no, you don't need an agent, you don't need a special in or anything like that. They have these open calls for proposals. And I believe their website is 333sound.com. I could be wrong about that, but it's a very democratic thing. And and it's just been posted in the chat. And so I submitted a proposal, and I submitted my ideas for how I wanted to write about this album, why I wanted to write about this album. Another very good thing about the series is they have a rule, which is one writer for one album, and then that's it. So it opens up for many, many more people to be involved. There's no, singular star writer monopolizing, everything. But it is open, and I'm always encouraging everybody I know who loves an album to, submit a proposal. And so that's really, when they're open. I think someone just said they're closed now, but they go through periods where they're open, and I can understand that. And if they were open all the time, then I know all the editors would be reading proposals. So, I think that when they have these open periods, I do recommend everybody to apply, because it is, such a great way and also for writers to just get their feet in the door, or 1 foot in the door, for each writer to get 1 foot in the door for music book writing. So I recommend everybody get in on it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that background. Like I said, we're really happy to have you here tonight, and we're happy to sort of explore this this series with authors over the next year. And so it's interesting to get that background. And I've got one more question, and maybe we'll get back into your presentation, but this is one I think all of the music heads in the audience can appreciate. So what release of Amazing Grace do you prefer to recommend to newbies? The original 72 release or the unedited complete recordings?
I recommend the unedited complete recordings. And this is the CD version that I have, and I know that it came out on vinyl as well. I think in early 2019, this came out as a 4 LP set, which I don't have. I just have the 2 CD set, but I recommend the complete recordings, and I recommend them for a couple reasons. Number one, more music. And I think that the more music, the better. Number two, One of the things about the Amazing Grace album, as wonderful as it is there were certain songs that were edited in certain ways that are um, not ideal. Let me just put it that way. In fact, and I talk about this in the book. I'm very open about it. In fact, Chuck Rainey, the bassist on the album, the very wonderful bassist, by the way, he very much objected to the way Mary Don't You Weep was edited for the LP. So I can see his point. So I recommend for more music. Also, too, one of the things that I feel is very important about gospel music is the spoken aspect. And there's a lengthy sermon by the Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha Franklin's father, who was one of the most prominent Baptist ministers of the 20th century in America. And you get to hear his full sermon, his full talk, and you get to hear his inflections, his rhetoric, and that's very much a part, especially if you want to understand where Aretha Franklin is coming from. So definitely recommend the. I don't know if the CD version is still in print, but the 4LP version. Either way, I definitely recommend this version. But I mean, of course, if you can find it, the LP version is fine too. But the more music, the better, especially with Aretha.
That is exactly the kind of information we needed here. Yeah, thank you so much. That's perfect. I wouldn't have guessed that was the way you were going to go, but that's why I'm here. I'm just learning. I'm just showing up and learning. Thank you, Aaron. I think that's all I got for
It's
the
a funny
question.
thing too, because little aside, one of the things I recommend to all writers, no matter who you are, what you're writing, is to have as many edits and as many editors as possible. It only make your work better. So before I sent the, I don't know if the pianist Eric Reed, I think Eric Reed, the pianist, might be one of the participants, and he was one of the people I sent, I think, like 7 drafts of my book to. Eric, thank you very much if you're there listening. Okay, Eric, by the way, one of the greatest jazz pianists working today, Eric Reed. And I talk about, I quote him in the book too, because his musical insights are terrific. Anyway, so he's here. Great. Hi, Eric. One of the people I sent my manuscript to, when I talk about how the overdubs happened on the album and how Aretha and how Arif Mardin worked to get some additional crowd noises in, how the edits work. Another friend of mine, not Eric, commented, he said, wait, I don't understand this at all. You said Amazing Grace is a live album, but here you're saying that there are overdubs. And I had to explain, oh gosh, yeah, every live album that ever was is overdubbed. There are like no pure live albums, except for the complete Amazing Grace. But this one, a lot of overdubs, and I talk about that in the book. I talk about why that happened. But I want to get back to some of the bigger issues and some of the bigger musical and cultural issues involved in the book, and that is that the sense of community was so important, and the sense of community in a lot of different ways that I talk about in the book. One of the things that always interested me about gospel music, and I talk about the impact that it's had on soul music in terms of the call and response, in terms of the material, in terms of the songwriting. But another great thing that I've always felt so important about gospel music is that sense of community and being in the choir, being part of it, being in the audience, being responding. And I think the film Amazing Grace shows a lot of that, but the record does too. And I wanted to talk about the sense of tying in the African American community to this history. Now, one of the songs, I'm going to play a track from the album right now and talk about the origins of the track and talk about how I wanted to approach it. And this is a track that was not actually included in the theatrical version of the film, but is one of my favorite songs on the album. And it's a song called God Will Take Care of You. I'm going to play you a little bit of it. And this was a track from a wonderful, wonderful Chicago gospel group, the Gay Sisters, and the youngest Donald Gay, who was the youngest sibling who would preach as a young boy minister, while his sisters, Geraldine, Evelyn, and Mildred Gay, would perform. And this was a song from the early 50s, from that golden age of gospel music, when there were so many of these, great performers like the Gay Sisters, like Clara Ward, who was a mentor to Aretha Franklin, like Mahalia Jackson, who we all know of for her work in the civil rights era as well. But God Will Take Care of You is such, a beautiful song. And it was a gospel hit in the early 50s. And it's also, you can hear it when you're listening to being a sense of a healing for the community, sort of a balm, and how Aretha Franklin's voice really embraces that. So this is a little bit of God Will Take Care of You, which, again, in writing the book, researching the book, loving Aretha Franklin, and also getting to know Geraldine Gay, whose sisters performed this originally here in Chicago and recorded it here. And so it's a song that's always meant a lot to me, and to hear it on the album, to know the people involved with it, and to hear Aretha's voice and her version of it. So this is God Will Take Care of You on the Amazing Grace album. Play you a little bit of it. The song goes on actually for a wonderful 9 minutes, and I recommend, again, everybody, pick up the complete recordings and hear the full 9 minutes of God Will Take Care of You. Okay, sorry. I thought I was on mute, but I'm not. Okay. Getting back to this issue of community. Now, for those who've seen the film, or for those who haven't, she recorded this at a church in Watts in Los Angeles, historic African-American neighborhood. What did it mean to go back to Watts? What did it mean to go back to the church at this time? So these are issues I wanted to explore, but again, it keeps going back to this idea of community. And along with the larger cultural sense of community, larger sense of, what it meant to be the responsibility that Aretha Franklin had as, the leading African-American woman singer at that time, the community within her group. And I really wanted to highlight that as well. Now, one of the, one of the things that I wanted to highlight was this community of musicians that was with her. There was James Cleveland. Now, James Cleveland, who's from Chicago, really made the whole choir a funky and flexible instrument. His Peace Be Still was a huge gospel hit. And I talk about him in the book. There's actually 2 books coming out about James Cleveland coming out this fall by Bob Maravich, a gospel historian here in Chicago. One of them is about his Peace Be Still album. Another one is about Cleveland. So I talk about him a bit in the book and his inventions. And then I talk about that group. You heard the guitar part underneath. That was Cornell Dupree, who had this really amazing ability to play rhythm and lead at the same time. So, I wanted to talk about what he did. Bernard Purdie, who played the Purdie Shuffle, this really great shuffle pattern on so many hit R&B and rock records from the 60s and 70s. And Chuck Rainey, a great bassist, who had a great way of sliding tenths is the technique. So also just how they work together as a team. This was a group that was recording together, touring, performing. One of the interesting things that came out in interviewing them is that they all had very, very different, and Chuck and Bernard still have very different personalities as speakers, as people. And, Chuck Rainey is very serious and gives very direct answers. Bernard Purdie is just very bubbly, very effervescent, and that comes across too. And so this community, of course, Aretha Franklin playing piano, don't want to forget. James Cleveland also sometimes playing piano. But so what was this community of musicians about? How did they work together? What made their interactions so special? And I was very privileged and pleased and to speak to so many of them and to speak to, like I said, people in the church. One of the very sad things about working on this book was that we lost the great guitarist Cornell Dupree before the book came out. I was never able to send him a copy. He died shortly after I interviewed Cornell for the book. So I want to play you, and I've never played this in public before, but it's a little 2-minute segment of my interview with the late Cornell Dupree. And in this interview, he talks about not just what he was doing, but how this group interacted and what made this sort of kinship among this community of players so important. Because that, to me, again, is so important to music making, is how all of the players interact, not just the lead star. So this is my interview with Cornell Dupree, some of which appears in the Amazing Grace book, and play it for you right now. Oh, let me also share screen. Let me put the photo of the group up here. So if you see it, that's Cornell Dupree, Chuck Rainey on the bass, Bernard Pretty Purdy on drums, and of course Aretha on piano. And this is what Cornell Dupree had to say about that time.
With Bernard, he's crazy, and he wants everybody to know that he's the man. And it's Bernard Pretty. But he could play, and he can. He still plays at the fatback stuff. Yeah. But Jerry Wexler loved my playing. They were soulful and always no pressures put on anyone. That none of us play it, feel it, and see where you're going, and just do your job and playing out what you're gonna play when the tape is running. And when the tape runs, do your thing. And that's pretty much a reason for you. It's just a matter of feeling them and blending in and being there. There was nothing complicated about it. She got up there and started doing her thing. She did her thing. Period. That's it. And during that time, she was doing it too. Yeah, from top to bottom. I feel what I play. The other instruments, the other voices, and entices me and inspires me to play whatever I play. So I play off of the music itself, what I feel. It's all about a feeling. That's me. It was good. I liked it. We were playing for that feeling, and we play off of one another, be inspired by each other, and we blended good together, and we paid attention to what was going on around us, and that makes for a combination of good music. But that feeling, my thing, Jerry really was the rhythm and blues part of Atlantic. The feeling you had while playing it, it was all good. All good. Stuff is some of the funkiest stuff you ever want to hear. Some funky stuff, man. Good funk.
So that's a little segment of Cornell Dupree talking about the funkiness of playing in the group. Another thing that's interesting too about the Amazing Grace album is that divide, again, as I mentioned. And I didn't really still say that much about it, but I did talk to people who were involved with marketing the record, people from Atlantic, and some of the challenges that they had in marketing what was a Black gospel album, and how it sold 2 million copies, even though they had no belief that it would cross over to a wider market. And one of the interesting things about the reception of the album is that at that time and to this day, there are separate Grammy categories for Black gospel and white Christian music. And when Aretha Franklin won the Grammy for best soul gospel album, Elvis won the Grammy for best white Christian album. And I think just the difference between these two icons representing these two different theological music of very, very different kinds. And that's something that was always interesting to me and still continues to be interesting to me to this day. So I want to jump ahead, and I finished the book, went through all the edits, went through all the public, and it comes out, and it did nice response. Now the movie had not come out. The movie was still, there was a whole bunch of legal issues, financial issues involved with the movie that I don't really feel I should talk about right now, but that was still being worked on. And then Aretha left us in 2018, and then the movie came out. And some of what I talk about in the book, some of what I say is things I saw in the film, were visible to more people when the film came out. One of the things about the movie that I feel is very important is that it's a straight up performance. You see Aretha Franklin singing, you see her performing, you see the group. It's not broken up by talking head interviewers, talking head people saying, well, this album was important for this reason, that reason. You really, when you see the movie, you are immersed in her performance. And so the book, I believe, still fills a very, very essential function, is that it provides that backstory, it provides that context, it provides that narrative. Somebody who recently produced a docudrama on Aretha Franklin. I don't want to name it or this producer, but she was interviewed in the New York Times, and she said that she saw the Amazing Grace film and felt that the story needed to be told. It's like, well, the story is told. It was in a book that came out 10 years ago, but so it still fills a function. It still fills a need. I mean, I wrote this book because I felt there was a need to tell the story of this album that wasn't told. And I still feel that there's still so much about it that even, seeing the movie and, there's still more information that needs to be there. So I'm going to pause for if there are more questions from participants.
Sure. I've got a question from Gary, and he asks, One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism is also a great album, maybe not as historic as Amazing Grace, but I wonder how you see it set against Amazing Grace.
Yeah, that came out in the 1980s. Aretha Franklin goes back to the church, records another gospel album. People like, Mavis Staples are involved in it, and it's a very good album. I prefer Amazing Grace for a few reasons, and that was, a much better band of musicians, much better group. Aretha's voice, I feel, was stronger on Amazing Grace. I feel that physically, even though she sang wonderfully, and I, saw her perform, up until a couple years before she left us. I mean, her voice was always very, very good, but I think with Amazing Grace, it was at a physical peak that was never to be repeated by anybody. And also the songs on Amazing Grace, like I played God Will Take Care of You and, Holy, Holy, and all those other songs. I mean, those are songs that I really feel are, very important for the gospel tradition. So, the time and place of Amazing Grace, I think really made it a more of a landmark album. But again, the One Faith, One Lord, One Baptism is a very good album, one that I'm very happy to own. But I still put Amazing Grace much higher on the preference, I guess.
Great. Here's another question from Valerie. Was meeting Aretha Franklin what you expected?
It was very funny. I guess we have a little bit of time to talk about it. Yeah. This was in 2001, for those who came in late. And I was working on a story for Downbeat, still at Downbeat then. And it was This was taken in Detroit, by the way, at the Baker's Keyboard Lounge, a Detroit jazz club. And so I'm going to leave a lot out of this story, but a saxophonist, James Carter, was recording a live album there, and that was what the story was. And Aretha Franklin came to do a little guest appearance. She sang a few jazz standards, Cherokee, My Funny Valentine, and I can't remember the other two. And by the way, she also didn't want to, eventually she didn't want to appear on the finished record for whatever reason. But it was very funny because, it was a small room, very, very crowded, mostly with people on Aretha's guest list and musicians who were part of the group and a few people in the press because we were all crammed in there. And so I'm going to leave a lot out, but Aretha Franklin looked at me, gave me a look like, who are you and what the hell are you doing here and why are you here? And her bodyguard, who was a very big guy, gave me a look that was almost as scary. And so I said, oh, hi, Miss Franklin. My name's Aaron Cohen, and I'm with Downbeat magazine. And she smiled, and she had me sit next to her. And she said, Downbeat, you used to write about me when I just started out. How come you don't call me anymore? And I was like, oh, yeah, sorry, I'll try to fix that. And so we had a very, very nice conversation, and she was very friendly and cordial and kind. And my wife and I met her in 2011 when she played at the Chicago Theater. And I met her again. My wife met her. I met her for the second time. And again, same thing, very nice, very cordial, but we didn't, she was very quiet. We didn't have a long conversation, very quiet, very nice, cordial. So yeah, that's Miss Franklin.
All right. That's all the questions I'm seeing in the chat right now. So.
Okay, I want to bring up a couple other points, and that is, I want to stress that for everybody who wants to write a book, to go ahead and do it. I mean, don't, stop. Everybody should do it. I think one of the things I kept telling people about why I wanted to write this book was because I felt that no one else was, and I felt that this album was too important to be ignored. And again, with Aretha's passing, and with the film, and with all the other stuff that's coming out with the biopic and all of this, that the Franklin studies are not what they were back in 2007, 2008. One of the interesting things that has come up as of like recently, and by recently I mean like this morning, today, June 23rd, 2021, is that they announced that there's a new 4 CD box set of Aretha Franklin Atlanta coming out, and a lot of it is previously unreleased demos and other material and stuff. And this morning they released one of the tracks, which is her version of You Light Up My Life from 1978. So I don't know if you heard it yet. I think she performed it once on TV. So I'm going to play you a little bit of Aretha Franklin giving a very soulful version of a 1970s tune that some people might have heard in the original version very differently. But so this was just issued this morning, and they just released this one track from 78, and I'm going to cue it up right now for those who haven't heard it. But it's, again, a different Aretha than you might have heard before. So I'll play you the whole track here. I can I'll post it up in the chat, but I see there's a couple questions I'd like to answer. Rosemary Lobato asked, after writing about this album and listening to it so many times, does it still make you feel the same way it did when you were young? Does it have the same power? Yes, it does. I mean, I think that's one of the other things about writing a book on an album is that you're going to be listening to it a lot of times. And so I've listened to this album many, many times. And I've, of course, prepared to speak about it many times. And, one of the great things about it, especially the complete version, is I keep hearing new things in different tracks. I keep hearing different, maybe it's, a different way of listening to the piano part. Maybe it's a different way of listening to the drumming patterns. Maybe it's a different way of listening to Aretha Franklin's vocal inflections. But there's so many great things about the album that, in fact, it kind of has more power because I've grown with the album. The album has grown with me. And we've kind of, I here I am talking about a record as if we're, growing up together. But again, listening to it so many times in so many different ways. I think the album still, it means so many things to me. And then, again, just the film does as well. Being a part of the gospel scene still does, for many reasons. And so there's another question in chat about Patti Smith's Horses. There is a 33 1/3 on Horses. I can't remember who wrote it offhand, but there is one on Patti Smith's Horses. But actually, Patti Smith recorded a lot of great albums. So if you want to do another Patti Smith album, Easter or something like that, that'd be great. Interesting too, also mentioning that Patti Smith also covered "You Light Up My Life." Well, Patti Smith lived Philip Shaw. Okay. Patti Smith lived in Detroit for many years, and Aretha Franklin is from Detroit. So maybe there's a Detroit connection to the song. I don't know, but it is, because I just thought about it a second ago. So maybe there is something there. But yeah, again, there are so many albums that deserve books. I don't know if my friend Eric Beaumont is here, but I've been on his case for the last 5 years to do a book on the Clash album Sandinista. But there are so many. And then Thomas Comerford, who's here, I've been on his case to do a piece on a different Clash album, Rap Patrol from Fort Bragg. So there's so many albums to write about.
Well, speaking of Thomas, he has a question in the chat there
for okay.
you, Aaron.
Hey, Thomas.
He said, I really love how Aretha brought in the contemporary songs into the live performances. You've Got a Friend, Holy, Holy, My Sweet Lord. And your book connects that to what she was playing at the live set at the time, yet they seem to fit in so well. Were any of these other gospel songs a regular part of her live set at the time, or were they curated, worked up in particular for this record? Curious about more overlap.
Well, she recorded a number of them. She sang a lot of them when she was a teenager. She sang a lot of them when she was younger. But the set that was done for what became Amazing Grace, this was new. She had sung Amazing Grace before. She had sung, Precious Memories before. She had sung all these before, but they were not a part of her regular set in terms of, because she also, remember, she performed at the Fillmore, the hippie rock venue, and of course, did a whole different sort of thing. But again, there was also a communal aspect to that as well. So no, these were songs that she was specifically doing for this session, and she was working again with James Cleveland and Alexander Hamilton to make sure that they were gospelized versions. But Never Grow Old, other songs, she had sung those before when she was on the gospel circuit at the age of like 14. Incredibly young. By the way, let me also add one thing about Aretha Franklin that's really important, is that so when she was a teenager, preteen, she's singing on the gospel circuit with Clara Ward, Mahalia Jackson, the best gospel singers ever. And then she's 20 and she goes to sing secular music at the age of 20. And who's she performing with? She's performing on bills with Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, the best jazz musicians ever. So this is like, 10 years before she recorded Amazing Grace. So there were all these experiences in this repertoire that had been like, implanted, I guess, or impressed upon her at a young age, and the ability to improvise the repertoire. So, Yeah, it was another part of this whole story. But no, and then after Amazing Grace, she would perform a couple of the songs from the album at shows. But and then she would also say, "This is from my Amazing Grace album." But she never really, other than the One Faith, One Lord, One Baptism album, she kind of like went away from, performing this material. Although she was again still very much involved in the church, still very much involved with, helping gospel performers and stuff like that, sponsoring them, helping them in other ways. But in terms of this material, this was pretty much it. She was doing it for this album.
Okay, thank you. We're a little bit over time, Aaron. Is that okay?
Yeah, but does anybody have any? I'm happy to speak for as long as we can. I got my water, so I can be here as long as need be.
Okay. Well, since let's see. I've got one more question, I think. What's your favorite song from Amazing Grace, or favorites if it changes?
Depends on what time of day we're talking about. It depends on what mood I'm in, because I was playing God Will Take Care of You, and then in the sort of introductory processional music was playing her version of Marvin Gaye's Holy Holy, and these are very slow, very lyrical, very sort of ballad-ish type gospel songs, and they mean a lot to me in a sort of reflective moment, reflexive moment. But then there's How I Got Over, which is a more driving, a more upbeat, and there's Amazing Grace itself, where she's really stretching out, when I'm kind of like in that kind of ability to think about all of that. So, really, I mean, it keeps changing. So I can't say, single favorite go-to track, but, it just depends on how I'm feeling at that particular time, what particular song, affects me at that particular time.
Makes total sense. So, I do want to be respectful of your time and
I'm cool from whenever. I mean,
okay.
I'm happy to talk about Aretha all night if need be.
That's awesome. So are there any other Aretha books that you'd recommend? Off the top of your head?
No.
Okay.
I know that they are out there.
Yeah, sure. Did Berry Gordy ever approach Aretha to be part of the Motown family?
Yeah, and her father said no. No. Which is, but that being said, they were on really good terms. She was on very good terms. She grew up with people like Smokey Robinson and people like that, and was very friendly with them. And, she had an interesting relationship with Dennis Edwards from the Temptations, and she, performed a couple songs at, Holy Holy, a Motown song. And of course, she was friendly with Stevie Wonder and people like that. So, I think her father made the very wise decision that when Aretha Franklin was going to go and sing in the Popular Arena, to not be affiliated with the Motown family, but to go to New York, where she signed with Columbia Records. And I could go on and on about this, but those first few years at Columbia, she made a lot of very, very good records. It was just unfortunate they did not sell as well as they should have, but they were very, very good quality-wise. And as I mentioned earlier, she would not have been able to be on stages with Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane had she been having to tour as part of the Motown review. So, it was a very astute decision to not sign with Motown. As great a company as Motown was, as great music came out of Motown, it was not the proper place for a singer like Aretha Franklin.
Got it. Thank you for that. So I just want to mention a couple things, and then for those of you who want to continue, Aaron seems like he's willing to hang out for a couple more minutes. I do see another question, but I want to mention that we do have 2 more 33 1/3 programs planned for you. We put those links in the chat. Next month is going to be Lauren Glass, going to be talking about Carole King's Tapestry. And then in August, we have Evie Nagy talking about Devo's freedom of choice. So there's registration links for both of those programs in the chat. You can always reach out to us here at one of your home libraries and find out more information. We'd love to see you. We'd love to really build a community and an audience around this series. These 33 and a third books are fantastic. I know I'm not going to write one, but Aaron is encouraging somebody out there. I hope one of you are inspired to write one. So let's see. I wanted to get that stuff out of the way, but then Randy had a question that said, I heard she was having a rough time before this concert, so it had to be therapeutic for her. Was it therapeutic for her? Listening to her insert "The Lord is my shepherd" in one of the songs was fantastic.
There was, I don't want to say too much about Aretha Franklin's personal life, but I will say that one of the traumatic things that happened to Aretha and to everybody in this group was that the saxophonist, King Curtis, and the members of her group worked with King Curtis. King Curtis was very close to Aretha Franklin as a musician, very close to all of her musicians. He was murdered in New York City, before this album. He was stabbed to death by some junkie. And so I think that had an impact. I think that was very, devastating to everybody who was involved with the record. So yes, I think that sense of healing was certainly important to her. And then another thing was that, as I mentioned earlier, her father, a very prominent minister, for various reasons, his ministry was, and his role in the ministry was kind of declining at this time. And again, this was a few years after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I think that put a lot of people, this country to this day still has not recovered from that. And I can imagine that for people like Reverend C.L. Franklin and for Aretha Franklin, who knew Dr. King, it was even more devastating, and that would still take more time to really fully heal from. So, I think that these two things, King Curtis's killing, Dr. Martin Luther King's killing, other strife that was going on in the country at that time, strife that was going on in the African-American community. Those are things that I would really highlight in terms of the internal issues that people like Aretha Franklin and the people close to her were dealing with at that time.
And I think we'll have one more question, Aaron, and then we'll wrap up the evening. It's a little bit after 8. So
okay.
Is there anything about Amazing Grace that you have since thought you would have liked to have covered in the book? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. Now, again, this is aside from the fact that I wish I had started working on it earlier so I could have interviewed more people who weren't part of the time. I think that, actually, I'll tell you one specific thing. After I wrote the book, I was talking with a radio DJ here in Chicago, wonderful, wonderful DJ named Terry Hemmert. And she told me an amazing story about, and she's a white DJ. And at the time she was working at a radio station, I think in Rochester, New York. And she talked about when she played the album on the air in this city, she was physically attacked. I mean, people tried to break into the radio station, white people, attacking her for playing Black gospel music. And I think that, I should have delved deeper into looking into how much of this sort of hostility there was in certain quarters toward this album. And I think, again, we're seeing reverberations of that in society today. So, again, that was something I found out about after I finished the book. And that also made me think that I probably, if I had more time, could have looked into a bit more about that. Oh, and also too, the role specifically of gospel radio. I should have delved more deeply into the role of nationwide gospel. I did a little bit of that, a little bit of gospel radio, but I should have done more.
Got it. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. It's been so nice to have you here tonight. So generous of you to come and share this knowledge with us. We are going to share a quick survey in the chat. So for our attendees tonight, and I do want to say, we picked a winner for the double LP version of the that we're giving away. Mike Weston, if you're out there and still
All right.
listening and hanging out, watching, you won the double LP. So we will.
Congratulations, Mike Weston.
Congratulations.
Let me also just, I want to thank, Michael and Jennifer and Jody and Neil, Glenview. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank all of you for spending, your Wednesday evening with me, and, for participating, for being a part of this event, for asking such great questions. And for those who didn't ask questions, thanks for listening. So, and I want to also stress how important libraries are. All of you just should be just so thankful that librarians are here. And I'm specifically thankful for one librarian named Aaron Cohen, who I am married to, who is sitting in the next room over there. So give a shout out to Aaron Cohen, and to my mom and dad, Sheldon and Kayla, who are up in Evanston, who let me spend my allowance money on records. And that put me right here. So hi, Mom. Hi, Dad.
Awesome. Thank you. I spent a lot of my allowance on records, and that put me right here and give me the privilege to be able to be in conversation and talk to you tonight, Aaron. So thank you very much. Thank you to the Addison Public Library. Thank you to the Northbrook Public Library. Thank you to the Arlington Heights Memorial Public Library. And I'm here at Glenview. So all these libraries came together to bring this programming to you. So appreciate the love. We'll get in touch with you, Mike, about your LP, and we really hope to see you at one of these future programs. This is a great way to start this 12 months of 33 1/3 programs. So we will see you all again next month. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks again, everybody.